So I'm Freeman, and Jaaga is sort of my baby. Jaaga is a large sort of experimental art and technology space that we set up here in Bangalore 2 years ago. It was born out of a combination of my desire to create a space that was very sort of alternative and sort of re-explored what it means to create space in an urban environment, and then also looking at what people can do if they have a fair amount of space and don't have the constraints of sort of really having to pay rent really fast. And so my hopes were that people could get into exploring new ideas, either in art or education or entrepreneurship, and that by having sort of a big, crazy space in the center of Bangalore, we could create sort of a hub where all of this kind of activity could come together, and we'd be able to feed off of each other and make new, great, interesting things happen.
And is the focus now more on arts people or more on tech startups, or is it like the combination which makes the mixture?
It's the combination. My partner Archana has a fine arts background, and so she's really bringing a lot of the arts to the table. My background is more with technology and entrepreneurship, and so I'm really pushing on that angle of things. And then what actually ends up happening ends up being sort of an organic mixture of these two.
So what are like the coolest art projects you did in Jaaga so far?
So there's one, you can see it up at the front. We did this project with this woman from New York, Heather Hagborg, and what it was this sort of robot, and she created a synthetic voice by sampling the different people who were involved at Jaaga, so me and Archana and Kieran and Clements, and created the Jaaga voice. And then we had sort of a crawler that went out and took content from blogs and other sources that were talking about sort of art and technology and spaces in India, and she pulled in all of that text, analyzed the sentences and built this sort of language model based on sort of word order frequency. So statistically, what are the words that people use to start sentences? Based on this word, what's the most likely word that follows? And so kind of built this kind of vocabulary based on the language that's used on websites that are sort of relevant to our world, and then generated a poetry, sort of statistical poetry, by recombining these words, according to their statistical weights to create phrases. And she actually did some extra stuff to include sort of rhyming and cadence. So it'd have the da 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 kind of tempo to it, and then we read it out, or had this giant 7-foot tall robot in the middle of our space that would sort of read this poetry back to the audience.
So it was like buzzword poetry.
Yeah, it's sort of buzzword poetry. So that's sort of what you get out of it is that it's a little bit nonsensical, but many of the phrases kind of ring true a little bit with what people are talking about right now. And so yeah, it was interesting. The other event that we did right before that was the Jaaga Sound and Lights project, and that's where we really put a lot of effort into building out the last space that we had with these programmable LEDs, and then we had this 16-channel sound system, and we had people sort of build in some kinetic sculptures, and then we had people design things. Like one person wrote this program that would take people talking about Jaaga and then move their voice through the space, sort of virtually, so that they were like they would emanate like bubbles out of the bottom corner, and then as this sort of voice got near to another speaker, it would actually it would trigger that speaker, and you would hear the voice there, and then it would drift, and then you would hear it from the speakers that were up a little bit higher, and so on. So you had all of these voices kind of bubble out of the space in different ways. And then with that one, I did a little Connect project where we took the Microsoft Connect, and then by sort of dancing, I was able to control the lights in the space. Sort of, you know, set the vibe and the theme just by moving around. So those are the biggest ones that we've done. That we've had, you know, many more, and some of them very interesting.
And the artists involved, are they like local artists, or is it like artists coming from different parts of the world and doing stuff?
We get a combination. So Heather came from New York for the Sound and Lights project. We had maybe 6 artists all together working on that, and about 3 of them were local and 3 of them were international. All of the events that we do are local, so you know, different groups will come in and do a hackathon or something like that, and so those are all primarily local. We probably get, of the artists, of the people who actually like stay with us for some amount of time, it's probably a majority of international people. Often sort of another larger arts organization will sort of fund someone to come into Bangalore to do some events at the Gota or something like that. And then since they're here, they'll hang out with us for a few days or a few weeks and work on some other project. And so, yeah, of those people, they're mostly international.
Could you tell us a bit about your background actually, like where you originally came from?
Sure. So I'm coming from Silicon Valley. I worked at Sun Microsystems in the Java group when Java first came out, and call it 1995, and then did a startup after that for a few years that was fairly successful and got bought. And then after that, I was really excited about this idea of doing an incubator, and so I set up an incubator in Los Angeles, originally in Venice Beach, trying to help independent filmmakers sort of move towards making media for the web. And I did that for a couple of years, and it sort of proved to be very expensive, and so I felt like I should go someplace where the cost of living was less, so that I can sort of, you know, keep experimenting with this idea of creating space for sort of new ideas. And that's when I came to India about 7 years ago.
So do you think like that Bangalore actually has the potential to compete with global IT and art hubs like the San Francisco Bay Area also?
Yeah, I think that Bangalore has the potential to sort of put very meaningful things out there. What I'm seeing is like one of the teams that came through the incubator that I ran is now applying for and will hopefully make it into the Y Combinator. So they may actually fly to the Bay Area for their next, the next sort of chapter in their development. So with the companies that look like they're being extremely successful, it's still looking like, you know, the very top may get sort of sucked out to Silicon Valley because the ecosystem is much stronger there, and there's much more money supporting this kind of thing there. That said, I feel that there is a huge amount of room in the space. I feel that, you know, we're at the very beginning of a revolution here, both of, you know, web-based startups, mobile-based startups, and that it doesn't make sense for all of them to be happening in Silicon Valley. And so I think that Bangalore in India is potentially a really interesting place to really sort of take the time and explore, you know, a bunch of these ideas. And it's easier, in my opinion, to explore new ideas here and run with them a little bit further than in the Bay Area, where we're just sort of kind of the expense and speed speed of the valley make it so that you sort of have to go very fast. And so you really have to be sort of on top of your game, and you have to make the decision about whether or not an idea is going to be successful much more quickly, because sort of the opportunity cost is so high. And I feel that for a large number of ideas and for a large number of entrepreneurs, that it makes sense to be able to not have to make that decision in your first 6 months of life. So I think that Bangalore in India has a significant niche in this scene that may eventually be larger than.
Because the costs aren't so high, people can take their time in developing the ideas.
Yeah, they can take time in developing the ideas. You can get to ramen profitable in Bangalore or India, at a small fraction of what it takes to become sort of ramen profitable in the Bay Area. And that because of that, I think that it can potentially have some profound effects on things like education, where we can potentially sort of backpedal a little bit and look at holes in the entrepreneur's education as they go forward and try to, start new ventures, where they can, come back and take the time to sort of bone up on technologies that they may not be really strong with, and continue pushing forward. So it creates a more spacious environment to really sort of develop, people on their own, develop the ideas, and get a little bit more solid eventually.
What do you see as challenges when setting up a co-working space in India?
So I'm trying to do something completely radical. My co-working space isn't normal. If I was doing something really normal, the challenge is that the startups that I would want to work with don't have much money. Almost by definition, they're companies sort of at the beginning phases of their life, and so they need they can't necessarily afford large amounts of money. What I've done in creating Jaaga out of pallet racks is create a very low-cost space, but that requires a very open mind to fully appreciate its awesomeness. And so there's definitely some challenges in sort of getting people who really are professional and are really concentrated on their work to come and hang out in a space that's so different from anything that people have sort of seen before.
Because people they just have to get used to that it's not real walls but made out of pallet racks.
It's you just have to let go of your ideas of what a building is. If you can do that, and we've successfully done this and had successful companies that were a part of our scene here. So it is possible, like we are functional, but it really takes an open mind.
What are like the basic things an incubator actually needs, like to succeed?
So people have a lot of different ideas on what an incubator is. With the incubator that I ran, the primary benefit that I saw it having was actually sort of the close proximity of other smart entrepreneurs. So there are other spaces that aren't even, and this is really what co-working does a lot too, but in our incubator we had a hall that was maybe 2,000 square feet, maybe 2,500 square feet. And then we had 10 teams. And the teams sort of got far more out of just sort of like their peer interactions than I think what I was able to provide in terms of sort of mentorship. On the mentorship angle, I feel like one of the main things that I was able to do that I think is useful for young people starting up is just this sort of consistent follow-up on and checking in with like, what are we working on, where are we going, what do we think, what happened last week, what's going to happen next week, what are the targets that we're shooting for, Like even if it isn't as the same sort of level of accountability as you have in a job, like having someone to sort of talk to about sort of where you're going on a regular basis, I think provides a level of continuity that is useful when people are first starting out, and there's a tendency to, sort of the mood swings associated with starting up tend to be very, very wide. And in the early stages, you're looking at lots of different ideas. So just being able to dampen that a little bit is useful. The other thing that sort of I find mentors or that can happen with the incubation is the sort of the introductions going outward. So it's sort of trying to help a team, develop, their core of who they are and be able to represent that, and then make introductions to people who can help with either sort of business relationships or funding relationships or other things like that. So that's kind of the end goal, and what gets most of the attention on sort of the incubation thing is this support with fundraising, basically.
Are there like also struggles you have to face with bureaucracy in India because it's so world famous?
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting thing, the relationship with the bureaucracy. The companies that have gone through the process of incorporating, it's definitely more difficult than back home. There's other things that get complicated. The process of sort of sending money in and sort of investing as a foreign national in Indian companies is a little bit more complicated. On the other hand, I feel that you can sort of go further without sort of engaging than I feel may be possible in the States. That we can spend a lot more time informally. And so the sort of informal relationships that sort of develop, both with the startups and everything else, my whole building is informal. There's more room for informal development to happen. So that's the counterpoint to the bureaucracy, which is very arduous and very formal.
So that's why on the long run you also plan to stay in India and stay in Bangalore.
Yeah, we'll see how it all works out. But I feel that this idea that that now because of the internet that you can be almost anywhere, and if you take smart people with access to the internet, a laptop, food and time, and they have the potential to make really great things, then I think this is the notion that sort of brought me to India, and I still believe that it's very true. I think Bangalore is great. In some senses, I almost wonder if in the long term there's almost opportunity going outside of Bangalore. So Bangalore is great, but it's also a dense city, and has relatively high rents, as far as India goes. And if some of our premise here is that we should be able to we should be able to sort of create something without the local support, then it's possible that that we could go someplace where there's a lot of natural beauty and physical beauty, and we might be able to start sort of a university type thing, there, which could be on the outskirts of Bangalore, it could be on the outskirts of Goa, or almost anywhere. So I think for me that might be my long-term dream, is to sort of have a startup university kind of thing that was in a country that was relatively low cost, but in an area that was close to an international airport, but had a more natural environment, and not a lot of the sort of downsides that typically come with a large urban city.